God forbid you do the worst thing of all and you poke the crocodile by calling them out, letting them know their shortcomings, or make pointed accusations that paint them in a negative light. Then you may as well open the crocodile's mouth and climb on in. Calling them out does not work. Here comes another proverb, and this is one many of you have heard, which is, don't miss the forest for the trees. So not everyone's always clear what that means, but again, keep the proverbs coming, and let's sort of deconstruct this one, which really gives us a lot of insight into narcissistic relationship. Don't miss the forest for the trees. So this proverb is really about not getting so caught up in the component parts of something, in this case the trees, that you miss the wholeness of something, which is the entire forest. And this is wisdom that cuts across many, many parts of life. You get so caught up in the details, for example, of planning an event, you forget what the event is for. You get so lost in researching the details of a paper or something you are writing that you forget what the actual goal was of the paper. You may, for example, get so caught up in the little details of a vacation and every little thing you're going to do that you forgot that it was really just to get away for a while, take a breather, and just get a different point of view. This proverb about the forest and the trees has its origins in the 16th century, and it was used in the writings of some guy named John Haywood. But these videos are about connecting this proverb. I'm not going to analyze here and talk about forests and trees all day. To take this proverb and tie it to understanding narcissism and narcissistic relationships. In many ways, this saying could actually shed some light on what happens in the early phases of a narcissistic relationship. Too often, people really do get caught up in the trees of the narcissistic relationship. This matters most in relationships that we may initiate in adulthood. Romantic relationships, workplace relationships, friendships, those kinds of things. When we meet new people, we spend too much time focused on the trees. Basically, the superficial stuff of a person. What they look like, what they do, their level of success, their interests, but not really the whole person. We deconstruct them. And that sort of proverbial tree focus really benefits narcissistic people in relationships because they're really good at mounting up some really good trees. The research is clear that narcissistic individuals care far more about their appearance. They look better than the average person. They dress better. They make more money. They put more effort into curating and displaying a more interesting life than the rest of us have. And that is just all the trees. These trees can also play on cognitive dissonance. Just as we notice things about the person that we do not like, for example, things that we might see in a narcissistic person like rudeness, arrogance, rage, manipulation, disrespect, we then talk ourselves out of it because we are reminded that they're actually kind of interesting, smart, successful people, and then even worse, may blame ourselves for thinking that, we deserve respect. Like, maybe I'm asking too much. This whole thing gets very messy fast when all we focus on is the trees. In a way, to see the forest and not just the trees in a narcissistic person is in fact a working through of the cognitive dissonance. The ability to integrate the holistic vision of the person Instead of just getting distracted by the shiny details, the narcissistic people out there are counting on you not seeing the forest. See the forest, it's a bit of a problem. Instead, the narcissistic people, that their ability to be showy and fancy or clever, or at least convince you that they're clever or wonderful or all of that, to convince you those things are true, that might be enough to keep you focused on the trees. Seeing forests means that we have to face down uncomfortable facts and uncomfortable truths. In a way, to see the forest means having to integrate the pieces that don't fit and make sense of them and critically analyze them, or just integrate all the details if we don't like them. Seeing the forest means a reckoning. That this is a toxic relationship with some pleasant elements scattered here and there. If we focus on the trees, it's a way in some ways of avoiding the reckoning, or the recognition that we can just jump from tree to tree and not have to recognize how treacherous that forest really is. Seeing the forest for the trees is actually, I guess we could call it a mark of wisdom, an ability to integrate knowledge and see the broader themes. My students over the years who get A's, who get the strong grades, are the ones who are able to do this. Not just focus on memorizing the trees and the flashcards, but see how all the topics come together. But when it comes to our personal relationships, it gets a lot harder. Seeing the trees doesn't mean dismantling a relationship. On the contrary, in a healthy relationship, seeing a forest or seeing the forest for the trees may be how we keep healthy relationships in place. In a healthy relationship, you may have someone who is good and kind and compassionate and respectful, but maybe they're not so shiny. Maybe they don't have such shiny, fancy credentials. Maybe they struggle a little bit with money even though they work hard. Or maybe they've come upon a run of bad luck. But they're kind and patient. And if all you did was focus on the superficial trees, you may actually not see the larger virtues of this relationship. This forest tree thing runs both ways. But ultimately, the narcissistic people out there benefit from you staying tree focused and never noticing the whole forest. Because if you do, you recognize that while there are a few really, really nice trees in there, the forest is actually really bleak and really dangerous. And so maybe we take the lazy way out and try not to look at the forest. But as this old bit of proverbial wisdom, the forest and the trees, tells us, that's never a good idea. When the trees start to coalesce into a forest, pay attention. And when you're in a narcissistic relationship, take your eyes off the trees for a minute, pay attention to the forest, and decide whether or not you want to stay in that forest or get out. A bad worker always blames their tools. You may or may not have heard this proverb, but this one actually has some pretty old origins, as all of these do. This one is traced to the 13th century French. I could not find a particular author associated with this. And then back then, the way that phrase translated from the French was that basically a bad tradesperson can never find the right tool. Now, I think you understand what the saying means, right? It makes sense at the face of it. If a person is unskilled, and on top of that is also uninsightful or lacks self-reflective capacity, they blame the lack of a tool rather than their own inability or their own irresponsibility. It's a bit like victimhood mixed with blame. So when we take this proverb, a bad worker blames their tools, we take this one and we elevate it beyond the tools. Really what it's saying, it's a glimpse at the blame deflection that is a central core of narcissism. Narcissists have a very hard time taking responsibility or blame, so they push it out. So just like that bad worker who blames the shoddy work on a lack of tools or blames their inability to fix something on not having the right tool, the narcissistic personality will blame everyone in their lives for the mistakes that they make. People with this personality style blame others for their failures, for their disappointments, for their stress, for their frustrations. This makes these relationships incredibly challenging because you're constantly being blamed for their issues. In fact, in the early conversations with a narcissistic individual, when you first meet them, you will actually find yourself trying to engage with their blaming. You'll say things like, I didn't do that. That's not my fault. No, really, I'm not the one who did that. And on and on and on. You know where that goes. Now, really, at these times, reality doesn't matter to them at those times with those personality styles. Reality doesn't matter to people who are narcissistic. It's all about them being able to cast blame out so they can maintain their grandiose and perfectionistic version of themselves. I don't make mistakes. It's everybody else's fault. The bad sales presentation wasn't their fault. It was the client's fault for rescheduling. It was the assistant's fault for not getting the materials organized on time. It was their partner's fault for not keeping the house quieter while they were preparing for the sales presentation. It's everybody else's fault. And that blame deflection is a classical element of these relationships, the proverbial bad tools. The blame projection and deflection of the narcissistic relationship, honestly, for a lot of people who go through these relationships, is one of the most exhausting, destabilizing, confusing, and manipulating parts of these relationships. Sort of them not being able to find their tools and blaming everyone else often means that other people end up taking too much responsibility, even for things that they are not responsible for. So the person who's not the narcissist takes on all the responsibility. It's not their responsibility. And because of taking all this responsibility for things you didn't even do, that can really result to holding on to negative emotions like guilt and self-blame. And over time, if you spend enough time with a person who's narcissistic, they don't even have to blame you after a while. You get so indoctrinated into their way of thinking that you self-blame before they can blame you. It's almost like after a while, you just sort of cut out the manipulative middleman and you do it to yourself. Sometimes people who find themselves in narcissistic relationships, now whether this is a family of origin relationship, whether this is an intimate relationship or a workplace relationship, they will try and overcompensate by making sure that everything is hyper controlled. So you're in a relationship with a narcissistic individual, you might try to compensate by making sure everything's very controlled, very organized. This can be exhausting. People in these relationships will find themselves almost at an obsessive and almost compulsive level of trying to control the environment, of trying to control their own words or their own behaviors enough. So the possibility of activating the blame-shifting tirade in the narcissist is minimized. And then you just keep appeasing and enabling the narcissist. You've got the house so organized that if they're like, it's your fault I couldn't find the scissors are exactly where they need to be. It's really difficult because to steer clear of being blamed by someone else who is clearly not taking responsibility means that you have to work on your own sense of self-assurance. To be clear and aware on what you are responsible for, to be clear and aware of what you're not responsible for, and understand that some of it is gray and that there is shared responsibility. The The narcissistic individual is engaged in a very unconscious and a very primitive process of projection and offloading of shameful or uncomfortable deficits that they don't want to have to keep stirring in themselves. And so they project them onto other people. And the narcissistic disconnection from empathy actually means it's easier to blame others because you don't stop to think, they don't stop to think, how would someone feel if I blame them for this when they're not really responsible? The challenge is that the blame shifting is also often coupled with victimization and a sense of persecution. A person who is narcissistic will say, I can't find the right tool, and that's because nobody supports me having the right tools, or they hide my tools. Things like, I screwed up the sales presentation because people are out to get me, and nobody believes in me or wants to support me. That self-victimization is such a classical piece of the narcissistic personality style. So whomever was this frustrated French writer who watched people do a lousy job and blame other people actually did a really nice job of capturing this dynamic of the bad worker blaming their tools and clearly telling us that this is a part of what human behavior and difficult human behavior and what some people do and have always done for hundreds of years, not taking responsibility and then blaming something or someone else for their failings. But it's always best in these blame shifty times not to engage or to engage minimally. If they blame you for something that is clearly really something you didn't do, you just nod politely and just say a gentle, okay. Document when needed, and then recognize that they're never going to listen to your version of the events. Some people say, it's unjust. Why shouldn't they hear that I'm not the one responsible? It is unjust, and they aren't listening. But let's take on this proverb. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now let's face it, enough of us have taken this proverbial road to hell and know that the potholes can really take you out. The meaning of this proverb is very clear. And I have to say, looking into the origin of this one was a little bit more hazy and tricky. I had to sort of keep going deeper and deeper. The most consistent attribution I got to this reference to a well-intentioned road to hell was to a French abbot named Bernard of Clairvaux, and dating to about the 1100s. So the road to hell has clearly been well traveled for a very long time. So at the face of it, we know what this proverb means. That many may have the best of intentions in mind, and yet it ends up in a bleak and treacherous place. This is an interesting proverb when we think about narcissism, because it really does take on two sorts of different directions. It's sort of like, I guess, a two-way highway. So let's take the road to hell of the survivors of these narcissistic relationships. Not the narcissistic people themselves, but the survivors, okay? These are relationships in which people keep trying and trying to keep the attention of someone who is clearly disengaged. The good intentions in this case are somebody or people who are caught in the cognitively dissonant and trauma-bonded confusion of a narcissistic relationship and believing that they are responsible for the dissatisfaction, not the narcissistic person, because they're responsible for this whole thing. And so the person, the survivor in the relationship, keeps trying harder and harder. Maybe if I call them more, maybe if I express more gratitude, maybe if I praise them more, maybe if I keep the house cleaner, maybe if I tell them, maybe if I tell them about my accomplishments. I'll keep them on the hook. Like, I really, really want to make this work. Then maybe, just maybe, if I get these things right, I can keep them happy. I suppose all of those are good intentions to want to be a good partner, a good friend, good family member. But despite trying as hard as you can, you keep getting manipulated, keep getting invalidated, diminished, perhaps facing down rage or other emotional states that are unsettling. You keep trying harder, more good intentions, and deeper into a sort of personal hell. By not understanding the narcissistic patterns and the consistency of these patterns, you may have dug yourself into something you fully don't understand. You keep trying to tame it. You keep trying to master it. Who knows? Maybe it's a replication of your childhood dynamics. You kept trying and trying and trying as a child. Maybe it is just you caught in the same cycles you've always had with your family of origin. But nothing is enough. I remember someone once telling me that every year they would try harder and harder and harder to sort of satisfy a narcissistic family member on their birthday. It would start with a card, then one present, then two presents, then more and more cards and presents, and then flowers, everything, just to see maybe this is the year they will feel content. This is the year I will have gotten their birthday right. And every year they would get more and more and more criticism. It got to the point to when this person was within 30 days of this upcoming family birthday, she reported getting rashes and nightmares. And such is the road to hell. This poor, well-intentioned woman, no matter how much she gave, it just kept getting worse. The road to hell actually runs on the other side for a person who is narcissistic. Like I said, think of it as a 2-lane highway. For a narcissistic person, they may show behaviors that have seemingly good intentions or look like good intentions. They may be doing things you actually didn't ask for, but are then unwilling to participate in the behaviors that you need. For example, buying you something that you do not need, and that's too expensive. But then not being willing to do something like run an essential errand that would be a lifesaver for you because it's sort of boring. So they'll get you this expensive gift, but won't do something really, really basic you need that you're not able to do. The tough part with a narcissistic person's intentions is that they are often self-serving and feed the ego of the narcissistic person, but sometimes may be, but often are not useful to the other person, and may be embedded within other toxic behaviors, such as invalidation and rage. These good intentions on the narcissist side can actually make the cognitive dissonance worse. The rageful reaction of the morning. And then they'll be raging at you as they head out to work and bring you flowers in the evening. The gaslighting about your feelings, and then a beach vacation. Many people in these relationships will say that they are willing, absolutely willing, to give up on the bells and the whistles and the gifts and the experiences just to have the trade-off of civility and kindness. But that is the struggle with the good intentions of a person who is egocentric and self-serving. They often give gifts to prop themselves up and get angry when the receiver of the gifts is not appreciative enough. Apparently there's an appreciation bar, and if you get a gift from someone who's narcissistic, you better show them the right amount of appreciation. The good intentions can be confusing and contribute to a sense of guilt for people stuck in these relationships who believe they are bad for thinking bad things about a person who ostensibly does nice things for them. Gets them a bunch of flowers, for example. The narcissistic parent who may provide money is another example, but they continue to scapegoat you. The narcissistic boss who pays you a lot but then bullies you. The confusion is really challenging, and the so-called good intentions may keep you in the relationship and maintain that road to hell. So the many intentions sort of floating around the narcissistic relationship often do not get people to the right destination, if you will, of compassion, kindness, respect, reciprocity. And while you think the relationship is moving forward, the destination isn't all that. In the long term, these relationships, let's face it, they're just not good for you. These difficult, toxic relationships are not good for you. The good intentions are not just paving this unhealthy road, but may result in the confusion, which I guess we could call the potholes, on this highway to hell. So all the good intentions, what look like good intentions, on the part of a narcissistic partner, or friend, or parent, whether it's gifts or advice, whatever works for them, those good intentions, be careful to where you're driving on this road, because it rarely ends up in a good place. Well, this one is a favorite of mine. Ready? Do not insult a crocodile while your feet are still in the water. It's a good one, right? This is an African proverb. I actually first became acquainted with it while I was in South Africa, and then I sort of strangely purchased a pencil case with those very words on it. I still carry that case around in my backpack. I looked at it recently when I pulled it out of my bag, and I thought, wait, I've got to put this proverb in this series. The meaning of this proverb is obvious. You don't want to irritate something or someone dangerous while you are close enough to be harmed. And this clearly has relevance for narcissistic abuse. It is actually a more poetic and lyrical version of something I've talked about before, which is don't call them out, and adding, especially when you are in any kind of proximity to or in a relationship with them. So it goes beyond just don't call them out. It's like don't call them out when you're close enough to still get hurt. Now, when people enter into relationships with narcissists or other high conflict individuals, they assume that they are dealing with a person who acts in a generally healthy manner. Okay, the red flags pop up, most people ignore them, and before long, you look up and recognize that your assumption was wrong, but you aren't sure what to do about it. So for a while, you do what people do in healthy relationships. It's reasonable. You may attempt to communicate, and you may attempt to talk about things, give them feedback, or call them out on stuff when it isn't right. And none of it works. You may try a very popular technique that therapists swear by. You will share your feelings and use I statements. I feel angry. I feel sad. I feel hurt that we aren't spending more time together. Now, unfortunately, if you try that technique with a narcissist, you're either going to get indifference, or they simply don't listen and look up and say distractedly, like, hey, what did you say? Or if they are listening, you will get rage because you activated their discomfort around feelings and emotion. Or you will get contempt because of their disgust around emotion or other people making their needs known. What you will not get is empathy or ownership, or them taking responsibility, or any kind of progress or a healthy response. And you will likely feel worse after this interaction rather than reaping the benefits of sharing your feelings. You may try to talk with this narcissistic person about life. Try to connect with them. No, that's not going to work either. With narcissistic people, there is something I call the inevitability paradox. The conversation with a narcissistic person will ultimately always go wrong if it goes on long enough, no matter what, because the narcissist's insecurities and feelings of inadequacy go so deep. So without meaning to or fully understanding where all the trigger points are, you will say something that will bring up their shame, and then bam. It will always confuse you because you will think, but wait, the conversation was going so well, we were laughing, and before you know it, you are facing down rage, or they angrily huff off or throw passive-aggressive barbs your way. Basically, if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic person, you are forever a person who is dangling their feet in crocodile-infested waters. It doesn't even have to come out as an insult, but the narcissistic person will perceive it to be as such. And again, in order to avoid that inevitability paradox, the key is to ensure that you keep the conversation short so you don't get to the point where it goes over the cliff. But God forbid you do the worst thing of all and you poke the crocodile by calling them out, letting them know their shortcomings, or make pointed accusations that paint them in a negative light. Then you may as well open the crocodile's mouth and climb on in. Calling them out does not work. And I've said numerous times on this channel, some people do it. They do the calling out because they just want to let it out. Years of pent-up feeling and rage. They just want the narcissistic person to know, hey, I want you to know that I see you, and have that momentary satisfaction of calling them out. In essence, that's a bit like a person at the zoo or maybe in a wildlife park that sees a wild animal and extends an arm to feed it or pet it, and then you lose your arm or you lose your life. Like, just, you know what's going to happen. If you put your arm in the cage of a lion, you know what's going to happen, or a crocodile, you know what's going to happen. Interestingly, I have talked over the years with many people who finally get out of the proverbial water and they're safe. And on that day, maybe once the papers are signed, maybe once they find a new place to live, once they get enough distance, they finally let the narcissistic person have it. Not because they think they will change, not because they think they will learn, and knowing full well the rage storm that is coming, but to just put their truth out there. I get it. And some people will say, not surprisingly, they were met with mind-melting rage and insults that were so cruel and close to the bone that they literally threw up after the interchange. Some found the interaction to be so traumatic that they regretted finally calling them out, feeling that they could never unread or unhear those words. Others say, I don't care. I just wanted to say it once. But they waited until their feet were out of the water. A mistake I see people repeatedly make is to attempt to engage the narcissistic person. I see people in families do this, people in intimate relationships, in workplaces, in court systems. I hear about people hiring mediators and reconciliation experts. Once in a blue moon this works. And maybe it's actually a blue moon that is also an eclipse and a planetary alignment while a unicorn runs by. And maybe when all that's happening at those times, sometimes the narcissistic person will capitulate, usually just to get a lighter penalty, typically not because they've had a meaningful shift. I know this sounds defeatist. I know this sounds pessimistic. I know this sounds hopeless. And I take a lot of criticism for taking this position. But every day, I mean every day, I hear and experience more and more evidence that backs this up. These styles are rigid, dysregulated, uninsightful, punitive, and dismissive of any other human being or their feelings. Proverbs are almost always relatively ancient wisdom. Somehow, ancient folks had a better handle on human nature than we do now. Get your feet out of the water, and once you are out of earshot, and your feet are also out of the water, you can say what you want to the crocodile or the narcissist, but not a minute sooner. And ideally, just get away. Because the fact is, the crocodile or the narcissist isn't listening anyhow. Thanks again.